A little rookie on rookie disagreement between Tyler Fitzgerald and Marco Luciano. They get heated in the dugout after a collision and a dropped pop-up that could have been catastrophic, but you know what? I love it.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show for 5.5 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And where we get started, given that the Giants are all but out of the playoff race, Fangraphs has their playoff odds still at 0.0%. That's, of course, rounded. They're not eliminated, actually, so it's not truly zero. And they won a road series against the Padres, so that's great. But our number one story here is this little, what do you call it? Spat. This little, spat is the term that Andrew Baggerly used in his piece in The Athletic between Tyler Fitzgerald and Marco Luciano on a pop-up that, there are so many different angles from which we can look at this. We could talk about this for an entire show. So basically the way it went down was that the Giants had a significant lead in the finale here on Sunday. It was 6-0. It was 7-1. And then they allowed 3 runs in the 7th and 2 in the 8th. And those 3 in the 7th, that was when this went down. And so what should have been an inning-ending pop-up turned into a very dicey situation indeed, where Jurickson Profar hit a little pop-up to second base, right? It's to second base. So to be clear, this ball should be caught by Marco Luciano. Now, apparently there's a lot of disagreement online, which I don't mind at all. I welcome the disagreement and the kind of tension between the two players, and I welcome the conversation and disagreement amongst fans. But I'm just going to give my opinion on this as a former player. I didn't play in college, but I played, from Little League through high school. I was a center fielder, so I understand, and a lot of people understand, even if you didn't play, the priority that the shortstop takes over other positions and why those are there for a reason. Basically, the reason being, and so the shortstop takes priority over others on the infield. The outfielders take priority over infielders on fly balls. The center fielder takes priority over everybody. So the idea is if 2 people are calling for the ball, and you're sometimes you're just both calling for it, and you have to have it in your memory bank or in your kind of internal, you just have to have it in there that if I'm the left fielder and I'm calling for it and the center fielder is also calling for it, as the left fielder, I'm backing off because that is just what we do. The center fielder takes precedent. And the same is true with the shortstop here when it's the second baseman and the shortstop. And that's what we had here. And so while this ball is hit directly to Marco Luciano, the fact that Tyler Fitzgerald ultimately did call for this ball means that Marco Luciano should have backed off. And the issue is that Luciano didn't call for it demonstratively himself. From what I've seen, I wasn't down there on the field. I couldn't hear him, but from the looks of it, he wasn't calling for it demonstratively. Somebody said, I think Fitzgerald said that he watched a replay and that, or maybe it was Baggerly said he watched a replay and that there was a little bit of an arm wave by Luciano. But, and Fitzgerald commented on that too and said that arm waves are for outfielders. And basically Fitzgerald, the reason they got into it in the dugout was because Fitzgerald told Luciano, you got to be louder. And in my opinion, he's 100% correct. And that this is the major leagues. And I'm not saying this is the major leagues. And Marco Luciano, that was not a major league play. It was not a major league play by either of them. And it just, your teammates, like you have to, it doesn't matter ultimately whose fault it was. And that's exactly what Bob Melvin said. Bob Melvin said, quote, "It's bad communication. Doesn't matter whose fault it was. It was bad communication and it's unacceptable. It's just bad baseball. We got to clean it up. Our defense has to get better." But there is more to it. And the fact that they kind of got into it in the dugout was a whole other side of this. But, I've seen it said, like in this article in The Athletic, someone named Dylan, I don't know if you're one of my followers, Dylan, but says, why did Fitz think he needed to run 50 feet to catch this ball? And then like a crying emoji. But that's kind of not the point. Or let me tell you why. When I say this is the major leagues, if you're Tyler Fitzgerald and you're out there and you're a major league shortstop, a ball goes up in the air, your eyes and your head are up. You're just looking at the ball and you're going towards it no matter where it's hit, essentially. And if you don't hear somebody else calling for it, you're not making an assumption that somebody is going to catch it, right? And so you go after it until you have reason to believe that someone else is going to catch it. And at the same time, yeah, you could glance over and see that Luciano's kind of camped under it. But also at the same time, Marco Luciano, I get it. This is a pop-up. This is like routine. But he has made some really ugly defensive plays, frankly, this season. All those errors when he was, the shortstop, all those like ninth inning errors. And just the other day with Fitzgerald also involved, Luciano, like there was a ball that, it should have been fed to Fitzgerald, but Luciano like came out of nowhere and like cut across in front of Fitzgerald on like a double play pivot and made the play much more difficult. Luciano running like hard to his right and away from first base and then throws across his body. Whereas Fitzgerald, if he's just the one who catches it clean and just doesn't even have to move and then pivots and turns to first. Doesn't even have to pivot. He's already facing the right direction. So Fitzgerald commented on this, that there's a lack of connection between the two up the middle. And so ultimately my opinion on this is that it's Luciano's ball because it's right to him. But no matter who you are, and this is where it gets a little bit, the controversy kind of comes in. I've got nothing against Marco Luciano. This is just baseball 101. If you're a 22-year-old rookie who's been making defensive mistakes left and right, as a major league shortstop, I am not going to assume that you have every ball that's hit your direction. And so as a shortstop, no matter who it is over there, if you're a 22-year-old rookie who just, it's a different story if it's Tyro Estrada probably. There's a little bit more, it's hit over there. You take that extra second to glance over and see, and maybe Estrada is yelling for the ball. We don't hear really what's going on the field when we're watching on TV. Like when they're calling for it, you can't hear how loud they're calling for it typically from watching from home. And so Luciano, given what he's gone through defensively, just scream your head off. I got it. Or whatever, mine, whatever you have to say. And Fitzgerald will not come out of nowhere and crash into you. Like the only reason he came over and crashed into you was because he didn't hear you calling for it. And I get it. He went too far. Like he went a long way. He kind of should have assumed that Luciano's got it. But at the same time, we'll go on to read the quotes from Fitzgerald. he basically said, I don't take anything for granted. And again, it's the major leagues. And if Luciano doesn't see it or something and Fitzgerald ends up like running towards it but just standing there and it drops, he gets blamed for that, for saying, why didn't you go get it when you could have got it and you didn't hear the guy calling for it? So they both have something on the line here. Every play you're being evaluated, and this play made both of them look bad, and that is why they got into it with each other. And I like that. I think they'll be better off for it. And we'll get into the quotes from them and from Bob Melvin some more. And then also an interview with Bob Melvin in The Athletic about this season with Andrew Baggerly that you're not going to want to miss some of what he had to say. So we'll get into all of that coming up in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. I'm also checking out FanDuel.com just right now because, hey, it's football season, and we've got Jets at 49ers starting in a little over 3 hours, and man, there's a parlay here. $10 wager wins 261 with a bunch of things that you can check out. And then also the 49ers 4.5 point spread here, -4.5 at -105 odds. And the money line -210 for the 49ers, the over under 43.5. So a lot you can check out at FanDuel.com. Again, FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, as promised, we are going to continue to discuss this. What I think is, it fired me up. It fired me up to see a couple of young players, Marco Luciano, significantly younger than Tyler Fitzgerald, but both rookies, kind of going at it. I liked this, and I thought it was cool. On the post-game show, they were talking about, Carlos Ramirez was talking about how, in Latin culture, this kind of thing is considered a good thing because it shows that the players care. And that's kind of my attitude too, is like, I want to see my team, the young players on my team giving a darn about something like that. Like, they should be embarrassed and they should get mad at each other, and I think they'll be better off for it, and they'll be better friends and better teammates and better communicators and whatever for it. Like, this has to get worked out. You can't just let that not get addressed. And so it's going to get addressed. Bob Melvin said he would make sure that it was addressed. And so, I like it. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Paul Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'm just reminded, too, that earlier in this game, there was a routine fly ball to right field, same side of the field, that Fernando Tatis Jr. lost in the sun and dropped. And it opened the floodgates for the Giants to have a 6-run inning. And so there's just a perfect example. With outfielders, they're way more spread out. But with infielders, they're close together. And so the fact that Fitzgerald had, he ran a long way, yes, to get over there. But the fact that he could get there, you are taught as a shortstop to go kind of on a pop-up like that, go towards the ball. You're not just laying back unless you hear the guy yelling, I got it. Then you kind of just start heading towards the dugout because it's such a routine play. But if you don't hear the guy, you go towards it. not a what that's just what you do. That's just baseball. That's what he's taught. And so, yeah, we're going to hear from Fitzgerald here, who says, I'll start off. This is via The Athletic and Andrew Baggerly. It wasn't my ball. It's communicating. It goes back to high school and college and everything I've been taught in this game. Just communicating. If anything, you want to be on the loud side of things. We just don't have that connection up the middle to where we're communicating on the same page. But I'm not blaming it on him. I'm trying to get across the point that we have to be loud. If I don't hear anything, I'm going to run over there and try to make a play. He goes on. Again, it wasn't my ball. It's my mistake at the end of the day. It was, in fact, charged an E6, by the way. He says, hopefully, an error on Fitzgerald, I should clarify. He says, hopefully going forward, we'll just scream as loud as we possibly can. And so he's saying it's my fault, but then he's kind of saying it's also his fault. Like, hopefully going forward, we'll scream as loud as we possibly can. But he's right. That's your job. This is the major leagues. Call for the ball. And if you don't call for it, I might run into you, because I'm not assuming that, and it's different. If you prove that you're just a lockdown defender, you may not have that happen. Like if Matt Chapman, if it's hit towards Chapman, and this is not like something about Luciano specifically. This is any 22-year-old rookie who's made a bunch of defensive mistakes. Just naturally, you're not going to assume that they have everything that's hit to them, even if it's a pop-up. And so I get Luciano also being frustrated because it's an easy play right to him. So Fitzgerald said he watched video after the game, saw Luciano made hand signals, and he said, but those are for outfielders. I'm looking at the ball the same time he is. When I don't hear anything, I'm going to try to make a play. I'm not going to take a play for granted and assume someone else is going to get it. And I just 100% agree. Like, like I said, if Luciano, like for all we know, Luciano's like, shading his eyes, doesn't see the ball, and we just, like, if that had happened and he doesn't say anything, Fitzgerald, again, is looking up at the ball and running after it. And if Fitzgerald runs over there, doesn't hear the guy calling for it, and then just lets it drop right next to him, he gets blamed. And not only does he get blamed, more importantly, the ball drops and runs score, and it hurts your team. And so that's why you just don't take anything for granted in baseball, especially at this level. And then Luciano, according to Baggerly, said he did audibly call for the ball. And Luciano, through an interpreter, said, just miscommunication on both of our parts. He didn't hear me because it was loud here at the stadium. And then Luciano said, I didn't hear him calling. Because, again, even if it's Luciano's ball, if Fitzgerald is calling for it, as the second baseman, if you're both calling for it, you are supposed to get out of the way. Even if it's not the right, even if it's like, why is the shortstop running 50 feet and I'm like camped underneath it the whole time? You got to get out of the way because you're both calling for it and you do not want to collide, because if you collide, you get what happens here, which is that the ball drops because you might clank gloves and the ball falls. And so that's the point of the hierarchy. It's not about pulling rank. Like some people on Twitter were arguing with me that Fitzgerald's trying to pull rank on Luciano. It's not about that. It's about catching the ball and making sure you have a system in place where if you're both calling for it, because again, you're looking up at the ball. It's not as easy as it may look to, a high pop-up. You've got to watch it. You can't just kind of look at the other player. You're listening for the other player. Anyway, they also agreed that this little spat in the dugout should have been handled differently, and that it should have been basically done in the tunnel and not in front of cameras. And Fitzgerald said some things built up and we went at each other a little bit. It's not the first time or the last time this will probably happen, being teammates. It's what teammates do, but we probably should have done it in a more private setting. So that was my mistake. And Bob Melvin said, I'll handle it. We won. Can we go on to that too? He also said earlier, I guess, missed the quote in the story, but basically Bob Melvin agreed that the handling of it, they shouldn't have gone at each other in front of cameras. And so this happens in baseball. Like, and if they had gone in the tunnel and done exactly what they did there, they'd probably work it out. Like, they're not happy with each other. Both of them should be mad at each other. But if they just take care of it underneath the dugout and it's not in front of cameras, and then after the game they say whatever they said and just kind of de-escalate, then it doesn't get noticed. But I don't mind seeing this. I don't mind seeing this one bit, because it shows that they care. It shows that they want to succeed individually and they want to succeed as a team. And I think that this kind of makes players, I think it'll help their relationship, and I think it'll help them individually. And I think ultimately it's a good thing for the team to have this kind of thing, especially in a game that ultimately doesn't matter, right? Because the Giants aren't going anywhere. It's way worse. And they won, right? It'd be one thing if they actually lost this game. That would have really made things worse. But they held on thanks to Ryan Walker, again, being a hero and just a total shutdown closer, getting a 5-out save, including a pickoff. But this game should have been not as close as it was. Camilo Doval also came in and allowed a 2-run homer, but it was 7-1, and it probably should have stayed that way, but instead 7-6. But the Giants hold on and do win 2 out of 3. So coming up in just a minute, we will get into Bob Melvin discussing the season as a whole, and also McCray goes McCrazy in game 2 of this series, driving in all the runs. We'll get into it in just a minute, and before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. All right. As promised, we are going to get into this Andrew Baggarly interview with Bob Melvin, which was done, I don't know exactly when, but recently, talking about the season and the disappointment, and also Grant McCray, giving him a little shout out for the game that he had in game 2, and then a nice little reminder of this is the big leagues and don't take anything for granted, and don't, it's hard. It's a hard game, because he goes crazy in game 2 and then has like 4 strikeouts and a ground out in game 3. So anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. And so the Bob Melvin interview, it's worth a full read. I copied and pasted a lot here of what was said, and there's probably too much to even get into today, and so we'll probably continue this tomorrow. But basically, Bob Melvin went over a lot, and Andrew Baggarly asked him a lot of good questions, and Bob Melvin clearly took this season hard, and he basically said it was probably the most difficult season of his career, based on probably the expectations being high, and that he takes a lot of personal pride in being the Giants manager. And the last question that Baggarly asked him was, taking this job was a dream come true for you. Has any part of the way the year has gone stolen away any of your joy? And Bob Melvin said, oh, a ton. Now, you have to put things into perspective. I've never lived in the city before. Where I live in San Francisco is wonderful. It's a fantastic experience. And there are days that I go home and it doesn't feel like it should. When we lost that Sunday game against Miami, Baggerly points out, on September 1st, I went back home and saw all the people leaving the ballpark, all the black and orange walking down the Embarcadero, and it killed me. I went home and sat there and just looked out and watched this and thought, we're so responsible for this, you know? And I feel that every day here. And so, again, I love it. I love that this is completely worn by Bob Melvin. And I don't know. I think that he's less to blame than a lot of people think. I don't really think this season was defined by Bob Melvin's managerial decisions at all. I think they struggled from a pitching perspective. If you look at their ERA, it's 4.20 as a team. That doesn't really fall on Bob Melvin. And it wasn't really roster construction either, because going into the season, this was a team that almost everybody thought was a legitimate playoff contender, like not just local analysts, but, you know, national analysts as well. And you can point to, the Padres also underachieved last year. And that gets covered in this interview that Baggerly does, which is that, the Padres were also a luxury taxpayer last year that had a very disappointing season. And then you look at them this year and they've been much better. We didn't talk about it specifically as it pertained to Bob Melvin in my last episode on Friday with Javier Reyes from Locked On Padres. We meant to and forgot. But I don't see Melvin as the common thread. I mean, he is a common thread in that it's just a factual that he was on he managed both of those teams. But then you look back the year prior, and the Padres went to the NLCS for the first time since like 1998, was it? I mean, he led in his first year there he led them to the National League Championship Series. And so that's kind of cherry picking to say, well, last year they underachieved. Well, in the first year, they had a very good year and were a couple wins away from going to the World Series. And so anyway, there's just a lot to break down. We don't have quite the time. I literally have like 8 paragraphs copied and pasted. So it's worth a read in full. I think we're going to get more into it tomorrow. I do just want to maybe, point out that Melvin says that a big part of this season has been the emergence of young players. And that's obvious, right? And I think the best part of this season, you could add now Matt Chapman getting extended and that's part of this interview too, is the extension with Matt Chapman. And does it kind of help cement the culture that you want to create here? And Melvin says, in concert with the younger players from the system, you need core veteran guys who are stabilizing forces and leaders. And Logan Webb and Matt Chapman are 2 huge pieces for us going forward. And with them and with the younger guys, we're not far away. As horrible as this feels right now, and I feel it every night, and especially now since I don't want to say it's a spiral, but we're probably playing our worst baseball right now. So this must have been an interview before this Padres series. Even though some of it was ugly, they did win this series on the road against a good team. He says you have to step back and see the future. These types of moves really encourage and inspire you to look at next year and say, you know what? We're not many pieces off and we're not that far away. We can be really good as quickly as next year, in my opinion. And I agree with him. I thought they should have been pretty good this year. And, they've only had, in some ways, like a good result this year in terms of adding pieces by virtue of their own farm system. And so you go back to the drawing board, they've got money to spend. They are a very active team in free agency. They've already got one of their big free agent offseason kind of priorities done by extending Matt Chapman. And even then, we broke down the payroll a few episodes ago after the Matt Chapman extension. They have, I think I concluded, just to match this year's payroll, $65 to $75 million, depending on whether or not they tender a contract to Yastrzemski. 75 if they don't, 65 if they do, roughly, to spend on next year's payroll. That's a per year. So they could sign Juan Soto for $45 million a year or more. That would be like a record, basically. But I know Ohtani's getting quote unquote 70 million a year, but the deferrals make it considered like much less than that, 440 something million 10-year deal. So anyway, I agree that they're not that far away, and that Heliot Ramos, Tyler Fitzgerald, not yet Marco Luciano or Luis Matos, but also possibly Grant McCray. It's to be seen, and every day these guys should be playing most of the time. But McCray, he goes off, and he's just been really impressive athletically. That gets addressed in this piece by Baggerly, is like, what is this team missing? And he mentions athleticism, like dynamic athleticism and speed, and that we've seen it from the likes of Grant McCray. And boy, have we. And also, his swing when he connects is just so like effortless, and it's kind of like, it's a nice swing, but he strikes out way too much. His strikeout rate is 42.5%. That's way too high. The league average is like 22%, so that's almost double the league average, and you just can't strike out that often. But when he's hit, he's made an impact. He's already hit 5 homers in 20 games played, and he hit 2 in the second game of this series. And just the arm and the speed, and you look at Heliot Ramos, has earned an everyday role next year. He could be that guy who finally breaks the left field curse, because he looks like a guy who could just be your left fielder for years to come. And then you've got Jung Hoo Lee coming back, expected to make a full recovery. And then there's Grant McCray in the picture, but no guarantees, given you've got to make a tender decision on Mike Yastrzemski. You can either tender him a contract. It would be a hefty price to pay to be a bench player, and so I don't see them tendering him a contract if they view him as someone who will be on the bench. So that's something to consider. And then there's also, you've got to upgrade, and if you want to upgrade, where are you going to upgrade? And maybe right field or something is a spot where you see yourself upgrading, in which case maybe it's not Yaz or McCray. And so anyway, there's a lot for them to consider in the offseason, but I'm just thinking defensively, if you had a Ramos, Jung Hoo Lee, and Grant McCray outfield, that would be just a very good defensive outfield, and have a lot of that speed and athleticism that the Giants have been lacking. So anyway, coming up tomorrow, more from this interview by Andrew Baggerly of The Athletic with Bob Melvin, and we'll get into anything and everything related to the Giants that may come up in the next 24 hours or so. So that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter/X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening today. You are now Locked On Giants.